Welcome to the Bayside SF Giants talk show. I'm your host, Marc Delucci. Carrie Crowley is out this week, so we subbed in someone who, if you're familiar with Carrie, you're probably familiar with too. Roger Munter of the There Are Giants Substack, highly recommended. I stand by the most necessary subscription for Giants fans if you want to know the ins and outs of the organization. But nevertheless, Roger, how's it going?
I'm doing well. I get to pinch hit for my K-Raj partner, huh?
Exactly. Filling in. It was only a matter of time before you popped up on here for sure.
We're getting to be indistinguishable. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, that's good company. You're keeping good company for sure.
It definitely is.
So last week, last week I was off. So Carrie and I will be talking for the first time in a month next week. But last week I was off, and so Carrie had to deal with the immediacy of the Jung Hoo Lee injury. We now
Yeah.
have a week out. We now have the official diagnosis, and if he hasn't undergone he is going to undergo season-ending surgery on his shoulder. But somehow it feels like morale around the team is better than it was at that time. It feels like that was kind of this low point, in part because we've had just a good week of Giants baseball, perhaps just, a 4-game winning streak, which is nice to have. They obviously drop 2 out of 3 against the Dodgers, but get the third game and then go on to sweep the Rockies at Oracle Park. And yes, it's Colorado, but the opponent hasn't meant a lot to the Giants this last these last year and a half season. Roger, it's happening. It's a accidental youth movement. Like I'm not sure how ownership feels about having their most costly offseason, and we're less than 2 months into it, and it's already youth movement time, and prospects are getting their shot. But I imagine for you, it's fun to see some of these guys getting opportunities to get some extended looks.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the almost everything the first couple months was sort of dismal around the Giants. The mood was bad, and I certainly felt that from my readers. They're like, rah, 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 why can't any of the prospects, blah 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 blah. And obviously the injuries didn't help. I mean, the Lee injury was a killer. That was really a little devastating because he is such a burst of energy on this team, and he's
Yeah.
so fun to watch play. So to lose him for a full year, and really this is his second consecutive year that has been almost wiped out by injury, unfortunately. Really, really hard to see. But certainly, yeah, the hidden blessing to all that was that. I mean, look, Elliot Ramos. I think we know from every sign that has ever been put out by this front office, they were not going to give him back-to-back starts
Yeah.
unless absolutely forced to it. And they got to the point where they're absolutely forced to it. And now he has the chance to kind of show them that they were wrong in their evaluation of him. Louis Matos, they weren't big on in center field. Now they have to see what he can do in center field. They are forced into some exigencies that are bringing up these kids. And so far they responded. And look, the Colorado Rockies are the gift that keeps giving. If you want to get healthy, play the Rockies 2 series in 2 weeks, and you'll feel a lot better about yourself. But still, the results on the field have been encouraging, and it has kind of given, I think, the whole franchise and the fan base a bit of a lift. And yeah, I had a pretty good post this morning writing about Louis Matos and Bryce
I was
Eldridge,
gonna say
and
Eldridge too,
even
right? A few homers last week, finally heating up at San Jose.
yeah, even Marco Luciano has had a good weekend. So it was a good prospect weekend for the Giants. Um, it was a good bit of the schedule to get that in, and I think that bit of the schedule keeps going with this road trip. Although, seeing Paul Skeens is going to be a fun bit of a fun challenge for them. Um, but it just, I think, everyone's spirits are a little bit lifted today on the rest day.
You're also getting right Blake Snell back. He obviously made a pair of rehab starts last week. Looked very good in both. And again, it's minor league competition. We'll see how Snell fares when he gets back to the majors. But no, I mean, a potential big infusion into the rotation as well. Yeah. I mean, again, between Gary, myself, and you on the Elliot Ramos train and wanted to give him a shot, I did a little napkin math, or not napkin math, Excel math. But I did want to do this beforehand because really it feels like the turning point for Elliott came when he came off the IL last season in around July.
Yeah,
He got off to, it's I think the thing that I've told Giants fans and reiterating, and this was true with Casey Schmidt, this is pretty true with Marco Luciano as well, is that, the Giants, whether they've been forced to, whether they've chosen to, for the most part, their top hitting prospects have reached the major leagues before hit. Traditionally, we'd say they earned it statistically. I mean, even Patrick Bailey was this way too. He didn't have that long at AAA and didn't really
14
do a lot
games.
and didn't do a lot. It wasn't like he was hitting 500 in those 14 games. And so what I think that has done for Giants fans, and honestly, perhaps industry-wide consensus on the Giants prospect, which is a separate conversation about trade value maximization, but like, Giants fans are used to with prospects, you see them pop up and then they're there to stick, right? And the Giants, I don't know if they've necessarily, their approach to player development, their approach to handling the upper minors, particularly the last few years, hasn't really necessarily been as consistent about that. Like, we'll give you a shot, and if you want to run with it, like Patrick Bailey did, right, we'll have no problem. We'll relent it to you. But we're willing to say, yeah, we maybe could call up a 26, 27-year-old, more experienced upper minor league player, give them a shot to fill in. But we'll just rather give you these opportunities. But I think it does create a level. It does make it easier, I think, fans to sour on prospects quicker in the sense, because they're going to see them not do a whole lot, and
Yeah.
with, Elliot Ramos, he really had never been even an average hitter over a prolonged period at AAA until, and even AA, you could say he was slightly, I think, above average when he was with you in the Eastern League. But,
He was, yeah. Okay.
yeah, he wasn't crushing it like he had at high A, right, the year prior. And, it wasn't until last summer when he comes off the IL. And since that point, and again, this is mostly AAA stats, but I sort of merged his triple, like all the numbers we've gotten since he came off the IL in that summer. He's hitting 296 with a 380 on base and a 560 slugging. He's got like 22 homers and 400 plate appearances. And like, obviously, I'm not saying that's the production you're going to expect at the big leagues over a prolonged period, but says this is really the first time we've ever had a prolonged period where Elliot Ramos has done damage against upper minor league pitching. And that's part of the reason I'm kind of bullish again that, maybe it's just he's the Austin Slater replacement, as it seems like, Slater, it might, this might finally be sort of the end of the road for him as that right-handed platoon bat. But, God, he hits the ball really hard. And for a team, after watching that team so much last year that had so few people who did that, obviously with Chapman and Soler, it's a little better now in the lineup. But it's just fun to see a guy who can put a 110-mile-per-hour line drive out there,
Yeah, I mean, Ramos has always had tremendous bat speed. He obviously has a tremendous strength. I at some point before today, I want to return to your point about rushing guys with maybe a separate conversation about Reggie Crawford. But I think Ramos, I agree that IL stint last year was a turning point, and I think maybe it was a turning point for him mentally, because clearly putting a guy on a 60-day with an oblique strain there's a message there too, because that he did not need to be gone that long for that injury. As soon as he came back from that, he has looked like a different guy. And I think in this stint too, there's a certain level of, screw it, this is my chance, I've got to make it happen here, that I think is helping him. And that's a process you always hear players talk about, that process of feeling like you belong and mentally getting over that hump, that every player has to go through in their own way. And I think maybe chip on the shoulder is helping Ramos get through that. I think it's really important to point out that he's still an imperfect hitter, right? He's still striking out 30% of the time. And the question is, and I'm sure that has something to do with the front office evaluation of him over the years. Mm-hmm. The question is really going to be, can he swing and miss that much while still getting to his power? There are some guys who can do that. If I was actually just looking at Fangraphs about this the other day. I think a really kind of pie in the sky comp for Elliot Ramos might be Teoscar Hernandez, who has, from the day he arrived, been that type of hitter. He has always struck out 30% of the time, but he gets to enough of his power, particularly against left-handed pitchers, that it makes teams want to have him in their lineup. Not as a guy who's your middle of your order, but you put a guy like that in like the 7th spot and just let him kind of flail away and bang some home runs, it can be a help to deepening a lineup. I could see Ramos turning into that kind of guy. I can also see him, getting to the point where he swings and misses too much and can't get to the power in the majors and doesn't quite stick. Those are the two kind of paths that he has in front of him. But one thing that's always been true about Ramos is he brings a lot of energy. He has a lot of fun in the game. He's a lot of fun to watch. I think his teammates have always really enjoyed playing with him. And that, that's another thing that gives a tired team a lift sometimes.
Yeah, no, and I think Ramos deserves an immense amount of credit. Like you mentioned, there's the 68-day IL stint with the oblique injury. He then also gets sent to San Jose when he is activated because they do a little rehab stint with him. Late in the season when he's doing well at AAA, they call up Wade Meckler instead of him when there's an opportunity, burning a 40-man spot, right? Like
Yeah.
there were a lot of, I think, again, like you said, there is no secret, despite, I know Zaidi said something sort of publicly even early this spring, right? He gets off to a slow start in the spring, and he was pretty quickly reassigned. He didn't really necessarily get a
He was sent out
prolonged.
early. Even when he was brought up last week, he got a start, and the next day he's
Yep.
on the bench, and you're like, well, okay. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the messages have always been there.
Yeah, and another name. I obviously this player has become so good that it is an unfair comp. But I think career trajectory wise, I think another, again, we're talking like 99th, 100th percentile outcome here. But Adolis Garcia, another dude, strikes out a lot, hit the ball hard. A team that he had approach issues, so the Cardinals gave up on him a little too early. Again, like what Adolis has become in Texas. I'm not saying that's what I think Elliott can be, but I don't know that the trajectory that Adolis. I think there's a scenario in which I think Adolis was around 25 when St. Louis sold him to Texas, and I kept having flashes last postseason that the Giants were about to put themselves in that spot. And I'm glad they didn't.
Well, he was a weird situation, right? Because he was older. He was a Cuban
Mm-hmm.
refugee, and he was older, and I think he was maybe signed to a major league deal
So he
because
was
I think
already
he was
40
over
man.
23 when he signed. So he was 40 man from the point he was there, and they were quickly reaching a decision point with him, and they didn't, spend enough time. Well, the Cardinals player
Yeah.
evaluation issues are a whole different podcast. We won't get into that, but yeah. So because of the timelines were different with Adolis and other players, it's hard to kind of figure out comps on them. But certainly, the physicality, the approach issues are similar. Adolis has made really, really strong advances on his
Yeah.
approach the last couple of years in Texas.
Yeah. You know, Talking on the player development side, we can. I think I do want to have the Reggie Crawford conversation with you in a bit, but starting sort of more specifically, what's relevant with the big league team right now. We have a lot of guys who, again, I mentioned performance at AAA, and the sort of jumping guys maybe not there. How do you, and even maybe conversations you have with industry folks, when you have guys who are sort of back down a level, right? Like the Giants have a lot of these guys, again, who made debuts last year and in many cases had
Mm-hmm.
prolonged stints in the big leagues, right? Like Blake Sable, Casey Schmidt, they were in the big leagues a while. Luis Matos, right? Marco Luciano
Yeah.
only had sort of a cup of coffee, but he still had a decent chunk of time there. And these guys are back at AAA. And again, like Ramos was, I mean, for the first month of the season, Ramos and Brett Wisely were really the only two players at AAA who were really posting anything to really like that was standing out in a Pacific Coast League where it should be pretty easy to put up some 800 north of 800 OPSs, or at least usually is for hitters in that league. Obviously, some of those guys who had struggles, Luis Matos, I think chief among them, has come up and been a little spark plug here. But from your perspective, when you're like looking at guys in that spot, Joey Bart, I think is another one, right? Who, despite whatever Joey Bart ends up being after his Giants career, whether he sort of maintains a strong start in Pittsburgh or he regresses a bit, I don't think anyone disagrees that he was a better player than the like 200 slugging player that he was last year at AAA in Sacramento. How do you go about evaluating these guys who you can see mentally it's just hard, staying checked in when you're in that place? I remember from Bayside Chats, the interview Natasha and Steven did with Trevor Hildenberger, where he joked like
Mm-hmm.
everyone at AAA is pissed off because everyone
Yeah.
is so close and doesn't want to be there. Like how do you approach those evals?
There's a great book about that I mention all the time called Where Nobody Knows Your Name by John Feinstein, which is entirely devoted to the fact that everybody in AAA, at any coaches, the umpires, the players, they all think they're better than the league and don't want to be there. And it's a very dispiriting kind of level to the degree. Like I talk about this sometimes with people at AA. That AA is a much more joyful experience to watch because AAA can be sour. I was talking with someone in the Giants organization last week, the night that Matos homered off Yamamoto, and I said, I think maybe there was a little AAA itis there for Matos that first month, and yeah, could be because that does get to players. They think they should have made the camp, and they go back down, and it's tough mentally. The evaluation of the PCL is, I mean, it's something close to voodoo at this point because the product is so bad the stuff is way, way down. I wrote about this one in one of my posts where I literally went through and documented the pitches that guys were hitting for home runs. And there were a lot of 89 and 90-mile-an-hour fastballs,
Yeah.
center cut, right? You know, you don't see 89-mile-an-hour fastballs center cut in the majors. And so it's hard to prepare for seeing that stuff when you're not seeing that. I think the ABS messes things up because hitters get passive in a way that works for them competitively in the game environment, but does not prepare them for facing major league pitchers. With pitches, you know, they're taking pitches that are going to get called strikes. So I think there's a lot going on at that level, which makes it challenging to make an evaluation for anybody. I mean, that's what, you know, Mike Elias, when he sent down Jackson Holiday, had a long talk about how hard it is to really evaluate when a guy's ready and be right on it all the time. There's a lot of guesswork involved. I think a lot of teams, you know, they look at the under the hood metrics. In Ramos' case, that's, you know, exit velocity stuff. His exit velocity stuff has been really, really good. Wisely's not so much, by the way. Wisely's kind of a king of soft contact on the PCL. But on the other hand, his swing decisions are so good.
Right.
So he's
And
walking
he's
more than
someone
he
who,
strikes
again,
out.
like you talk about capitalizing on the ABS, like he has the profile to I think he definitely maximizes that down there.
Right. And that's the kind of guy you just don't know what you're going to get when he comes up. Is that sort of zone discipline a mirage, or to some degree, or not? And I think the players themselves don't know that until they're facing, you know, the kind of stuff they're going to see at the big league level. It's really hard. It is really hard. I don't know that. I mean, I worried about Luciano when they brought him up because his opening month has had a lot of red flags in it, but he's actually been taking really good at bats. He's taken some, you know, kind of tough at bats, and he's been competitive up there, which is what you want to see. Matos, you know, his contact wasn't that great in the PCL. His contact's very good in the majors. So, I mean, some of it you'd have to take on faith. Some of it is underlying stuff. Matos almost never swings and misses.
Yep.
His hit tool is really, really good, and yet he's got his maximum X velocity this year up to 111. And I can tell you, there aren't a lot of people who combine an ability to get to 111 miles per hour exit velocity and have the swinging strike rate he does. It's a very small cross section of players that can do both of those things well. And I think you look at that and say he's going to figure it out at some point, right? Because the skills are too undeniable to some degree.
Yeah, Matos just feels like, and again, this was even last year when, you know, I got to watch him a lot up close in the big leagues when he got off to obviously a start that was kind of reminiscent of early Arias, and then really fell off as the season went on. The soft contact and the grounders just really kind of ate him up. But yeah, you could just see there was a level like this guy has such a special ability to make contact. And again, at such a young age when he was doing it last year, especially, it feels like it's just hard for me to say this isn't going to turn into something, again, that's at least a long-term contributor in some form. Now, again, like there's the levels to prospect analysis, right? It's like, it's a win if Marcos Luciano becomes Patrick Wisdom in a sense, because like turning an IFA player into Patrick Wisdom is good. But in terms of like determining the future of your franchise and like getting those cornerstone pieces, that's the next level, right? That's the separator, right? There's making big league players, and then there's producing, you know, a couple superstars, which is the foundation of a champion, which is what you pretty much need at this point most of the time to be the foundation of a championship team, you know? And so that's, I think, where the Giants have started to find themselves. I guess from my place, I think the thing I'll say is I think the Zaidi front office has been able to, in his first few years, I am more confident in their ability to produce or churn through and find big leaguers than I was towards the end of the Evans term. But I think that's, I think, the thing we're waiting on, which is ultimately the hardest part, right? But they're, you know, again, finding the Yastrzemskis and the Wades, or just, you know, drafting guys who, you know, like Casey Schmidt has gotten to the big leagues and filled in at times. Patrick Bailey obviously looks like a consistent long-term piece, barring health and things like that. But the question now is, okay, but what makes the Astros and the Dodgers, those guys, isn't the fillers, right? It's the guys at the top who've been able to make an impact, or the guys who have the highest upside that you can trade for the guy who can make the impact, which the Giants also really haven't been able to do at this point. And that's, I think, the thing where when you look at where, you know, that's the last question that needs to be answered, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to have, this is what the problem of the last 2 years is that we've had all of these kind of complementary parts. It's a team made of complementary parts, and you have to have that catalyzing force that can propel those parts forward. And they have been missing that. They're still missing that, and it's a big question whether if that guy is Bryce Eldridge, Farhan Zaidi is not going to be the one leading
Probably
the team
not.
that Bryce Eldridge is the star of, right? It's something has to happen quicker than that, and it is the outstanding question. And I don't know if it's Louis Matos. I don't know if Louis Matos is a center fielder or if he's a corner guy with tweener power. That's been a question about him for a long time. I don't know if it's Marco Luciano. There are a lot of questions about Marco Luciano as a hitter, as a fielder. But these guys are still really young and they're still learning, and they have always shown aptitude. I think, Matos, Luciano, Casey Schmidt, Elliot Ramos. They need to get two good starters out of that group.
Yeah.
I think without a doubt, they have to have two guys who are at least, that kind of 3 to 5 WAR kind of player from that group of 4. That's the first thing. And then we can start thinking about,
and that'll buy you time
do
for
we
the
have
Eldridge or the Arias or whoever else to,
But it makes a big difference when you got that one guy, even if it's like Buster Posey. I mean, the Orioles, Adley Rutschman from the day he arrived was a star, and that has changed everything in that franchise. And then you get Gunnar Henderson right behind him, and now, you could fill in around that with really good complementary pieces. They may have better than just complementary pieces, but once you establish those beachheads, everything looks better.
Yeah. Right, because that's the thing, right? It's like, bullpens are the easiest one. Where oftentimes a bad bullpen, right, is like one great closer away, because then the fringy closer becomes a really good 8th inning guy, and the fringy 8th inning guy becomes a 7th inning guy, and whatever. The lineups can be that way too, right? And that's, again, where it feels like the Giants have been, because, again, they have a lot of complementary pieces. It's giving them the piece to complement, right? And it says something about player development. I think it also says something about, probably Zaidi is disappointed with where the franchise is versus where he started, that we are this far into his tenure. And you mentioned we need 2 of these 4 guys to be started, and 3 of them are players he inherited in the farm system, and Luciano, Matos, and Ramos, right? That, that ironically, to save his job, or, well, again, I won't say save. I'm not saying that from a connected place, but probably to sustain himself in this job 5 years into it, it's still getting more out of the prospects he inherited at this moment in time. It seems like is probably the path that he has to take to do that, which is just, again, part of it's the randomness of player development, and part of it's just the level of his first draft. The 2019 draft really hasn't resulted in anything for the Giants at the prospect level. And, that's how you end up here.
I mean, prospects take a long time. That's when he and Friedman went to LA, they had Corey Seager in the organization. Did they have Bellinger? He might have been their first draft. When Anthopoulos went to Atlanta, most of that team was already in the system. That's the nature of taking over a team, is that you're going to benefit from somebody way the heck down there, because their lead time is long.
Yeah, I guess I did mention the 2019 draft, but Hunter Bishop does have his 2000 OPS at AAA right now after his
Hunter Bishop is doing very well, very well at AAA.
If there's the profile that you say, like, when they get promoted from Richmond to AAA, where I don't care what their numbers were at AA, there's a decent chance it's the guy who has a good eye, strikes out a lot, and has power. It's like, there's a coin flip that he might start crushing at AAA after struggling at AA.
He is really hitting the ball hard. It's funny. I don't know right offhand where his numbers were when he ended, but they were on a road trip when he left. So I'm sure this is true, that he, like a few guys who play in Richmond, had ginormous home road splits. His numbers at the Diamond were extremely poor, and his numbers on the road were pretty good. And whether that is just random sequencing or it's all the things about the Diamond that sometimes get in hitters' heads, or the background of the lighting or whatever, the problems are with hitters there. Who's to say? But he was doing pretty well and taking good at bats on the road. So it's interesting to see how well he's transferred that. I mean, his talk about a guy who hits the ball hard. He's putting up some extra velocities in Sacramento. But you're right. He is kind of the perfect person for that transition.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember even back when he was at Arizona State and it was him and Spencer Torkelson in the middle of that lineup, and they were both hitting crazy amounts of bombs. And you looked at who were the top, like the top exit velos on Arizona State. The top 15 were all Bishop. Torkelson couldn't get in there because Bishop was just crushing it that summer. I actually can't pull it up because he's only played at home in Sacramento so far. So on the road at AA, he was hitting 280 with a 350 on base and a 440 slugging. So that tells you right there that,
which is quite good for the
that's
Eastern
really
League,
good for,
Eastern League spring.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And only
Um,
only a 27% strikeout rate, which for him, that's manageable.
I mean, given the fact that he hadn't seen competitive pitching in over a year, yeah, that's not bad, and got pushed to AA. I mean, I don't. Of course, I get all I get a lot of reader questions that are, how excited can we get about Hunter Bishop? I'm like, just let the kid play. I mean,
Yeah.
he has always needed reps. He still needs reps. He's probably not Josh Hamilton. He's probably
Right.
not going to step back into baseball after taking no bats for 2 years and be the rookie of the year. But he's still, you can look at the exit velocities and see the raw power is there. You can look at his home to home time on that inside the park home run the other day and see the speed is still there.
Yeah.
So the things that were there haven't gone away, and it's still a matter of reps and timing.
Yep. Health and consistency, which, there's plenty of prospects, again, more than not aren't able to get that right when that's a question, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen, right?
It is hard when you lose that many reps. It is hard to catch up, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I mean, we've seen too many success stories of situations like that to say it can't happen. And it would be a great story if he does, because he's a really good kid.
Mm-hmm. And so we talked a lot about the offensive side. You mentioned Reggie Crawford and wanting to talk on that a bit. So I'll bring us back there now, because the next first round, or two first round picks, I guess we're doing the whole first round pick gamut here. But he reached AAA with Hunter Bishop. But again, talking about someone where we talk, reps is the question. Reps was the question. Coming out in the draft, having just had Tommy John surgery, not really much experience pitching, both because of 2020 two-way playing, injury, all that. Giants were very cautious with his innings limit in his first full season coming off that injury. He was also doing the two-way player, experimenting with that, which took some reps. Giants have sort of said, no, you're going to be only a pitcher this year, but still not pushing his pitch counts, being very cautious, but he's now at AAA. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, / what you wanted to touch on with that.
Well, I will say that I'm just looking at his pitch counts this year. I do think from what he told me that, and everyone has their own side of the story. Mm-hmm. I think he actually went to the Giants and said he was ready to focus on one thing, because he did see that in his AFL experience that he was behind his peers, and thought about what's the best way for me to go. So I think there was a meeting of minds there. Mm-hmm. And so obviously there was a press accessibility with Farhan Saidi sometime last week, and one of the things that came out of it was that maybe Reggie Crawford's in the big leagues this year, which has always been a possibility. I was running that last winter. That looked to me like that might be a strategy they'd want to employ. While you can't stretch them out, you can still use the bullets in a certain way. Baseball America had a piece earlier this year comparing him to maybe Garrett Crochet, which I think is a really interesting way to think about his development. But the thing that kind of like goes around the internet as well is Zaidi expects Reggie Crawford to be in the pitch of the majors this year. I think if you listen to him, he nuanced it more, and he noted that, for instance, Reggie Crawford's never pitched less than 4 days apart, right? Big league relievers pitch on back-to-back days, or at least with 1 day rest. He's nowhere near that. He's, a lot of outings are like 12 pitches, 20 pitches. So he's not getting stressed that much. He's also not really using his secondaries a lot. I think if you look at the two, I noticed this when he was in Richmond, that he didn't always have a great feel for the slider and he'd go away from it. And I think that's because when you're only throwing, 15 pitches, it's hard to develop a feel for field pitches. The two outings he's made at Sacramento, he's thrown one slider in each of those games. Yesterday, sometime this weekend, he had a 2-inning stint, or it ended up being 1 1/3. Mm-hmm. And then the second inning, when he went back out, you saw him start using his changeup a lot. But the first inning was all fastballs. And the other thing you noticed was in the second inning, his velo went way down, which is something that relievers deal with. That the sit and stand or cool down, heat up is hard for pitchers to do. So those are all kind of stuff that he still has to learn, like build up to the point where he can go every third day and every second day and maybe to back, build up to the point where he can come back for a second inning where the stuff still is good. And start getting a feel for those secondaries and mix them in, because even though his stuff is really, really good, you can't just take him and stick him in the majors and say,
Yes.
throw nothing but 97-mile-an-hour fastballs, because major league hitters are going to hit those. So there is more developing for him to do. And the Giants know this,
Hmm.
but you get a quote out there on the internet
Yeah.
and it starts building up that anticipation. I don't think Reggie Crawford is anywhere near ready to get major league hitters out right now.
Yeah.
And there's stuff that has to happen before he gets there.
Yeah, I saw that quote too, and it did get I felt like it got interpreted nearly synonymously to how Zaidi talked about Kyle Harrison leading into last year.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
Yeah.
you are absolutely right. Those quotes were not saying the same thing, right? One, like with
Yeah.
Harrison, Zaidi was very adamantly like, yeah, we think he'll be ready. And like it kind of was sounded like, yeah, they were sort of ready to line up a rotation spot for him at some point in the season. Where when he was talking about Crawford, there were a lot more caveats. There were a lot more of, he has the stuff to get big league hitters out now. He could be in the bullpen, but
Right.
there are certain hurdles he has to get over. The other thing that's so tough with Crawford, and again, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what I would be advocating for if I was in sort of the decision making conversations. Is Crochet is an interesting comp because a guy who has obviously early Tommy John surgery that throws off development, lefty, gets to the back of the pen. White Sox try to shift him to a rotation. But the thing you had with Crochet is he'd been a dominant starter in college. And
Yeah.
so it felt like, well, we can put the starter and we can maybe put the starter development aside because he knows what it's like to start 10 times in a year, 15 times in a year, and work into the seventh, eighth inning. Reggie Crawford literally has never done that, and
Yeah.
so it's so difficult because the steps to make Reggie Crawford a factor for the Giants in 2024, I do think hurt his chances of being even a 4 starter in 2026, if that, or being a starter down the line, if that's what you want. At the same time, we are 2 seasons into Crawford's pro career at this point, 2 full seasons, or in his second full season. And it is, how long are the Giants, what is the ramp up where you say, okay, he's only been throwing 20 to 30 pitches an outing. When are we going to say, yeah, you can jump to 60, you can jump to 80, you can jump to 100, right? Like it does feel, again, they aren't at the decision-making point yet. They don't have to make a decision on, what they're building Reggie Crawford to be in the next month or two. But I do think there is something to the steps to make him, an impact player sooner are going to they bring that ceiling down, right? They just do. And the things
Yeah.
to prolong, the things that give him a longer chance to maybe reach that that starting pitcher ceiling, or, that to get to everything, probably do prolong a timeline. And it's just going to be a difficult thing. And we'll see how they manage it. Cause there's also, there's always the question of, it's always, I feels like, difficult because once you throw a guy in the bullpen, if they're really good, it really gets hard to put them in the rotation because you naturally become
Yeah.
reliant on them, right? Like this is, I mean, not that Aroldis Chapman necessarily would have become a great starter, but he had some promising back of rotation guys early in his career. Maybe there's a little more command that comes. He gets thrown in the bullpen. He's too dominant, right? Like you're not going to take Aroldis Chapman away from closing when you're the Reds at that point. And again, there are examples of players who've obviously started their careers in the bullpen and whatnot. But yeah, with Crawford, this is someone who hasn't been a starter in college, really, hasn't been a starter in the pros, really, over any prolonged period. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it becomes a question too. If he does end up being dominant and effective enough to be in the bullpen in, say, August and September and is good, then that's probably what I find it hard to believe that then you're going to be able to take the steps you need for Reggie Crawford to become the starter, right?
Yeah. I have always been a little skeptical on that. I mean, the most pitches he's ever thrown in an outing as a pro is 38. And I don't honestly know if he's ever thrown more than that in the other venue either.
Yeah.
I don't know that he did at UConn, maybe with Team USA, although Team USA was playing
He was like,
exhibitions that
yeah,
year.
he
It
was
wasn't really.
mostly inning
I
outs
know he
there.
didn't do that on the Cape. So I don't know. And it is a lot to say, learn to be a starting pitcher, everything about a starting pitcher in the majors. That stretches the imagination a little bit. I think there's this divide, the Athletic, of course, a few weeks ago had the great pieces on bringing back starters. And one of them, Justin Verlander, and was talking about what you had to learn as a pitching prospect when he was coming up, and that they made you kind of like pitch, change speeds, pitch to the corner, all the classic sort of learn to pitch things that more or less today are going away because the teams identify stuff and they say, let's get the stuff up here,
Right.
and then we'll teach you how to be a pitcher in the majors, which is a very different philosophy. And that definitely is going to be the case with Crawford. If he ever turns into a starter, it's because everything you need to know about a starter, he's going to learn in the majors, not in the minors. But maybe it's true. Maybe it's true that if you have the stuff, you don't need to learn all the classic pitcher stuff. I will say, I've made this point before, that Logan Webb is sort of a case in point of this, because of how young he was and inexperienced, and where Tommy John hit him. And then immediately after Tommy John was the suspension. Yeah. You could probably count on one hand the number of times he threw 5 innings in his minor league career. Yeah. He did not throw a lot of innings total. He did not go long in games. That 2018 season, where he really put himself on the mark. He was coming back from Tommy John, so they almost never let him go past 3 innings until the very last month of that season. So, I mean, that's a guy you can look at and say he learned how to be a starting pitcher in the major leagues, and it's worked. So, maybe proof in point.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Roger, I appreciate you filling in, helping me out today, subbing in for Carrie. Want to give a little roadway for you to plug what you do. Although if anyone's listening to this and doesn't know what you do and knows what I do, I'm a bit confused as to how that happened. But just in case,
I have a site called There Are Giants, R for Roger, which I put out copious amounts of words on a daily basis, basically covering the entire Giants farm system. I get out to lots of games and have lots of video on there. I'll be in Bowie this week watching the Squirrels take on a very talented Orioles AA team. I have a lot of podcasts. I interview players and people around the game. And I think generally have the one-stop shop for everything that is going on in the Giants farm system. And it's a fun community. So everyone come join their Giants community, and I'll be happy to see you there.
Yeah, again, if you aren't subscribed, I truly highly recommend it. There's one of the most informative, honestly, just baseball in general. Because again, you obviously focus on the Giants organization, you do all that stuff, but I think it's just a great way for folks to get a snapshot of what's happening within organizations in general. Like the Giants are the sort of case study for that. But I think even for non-Giants, just baseball fans, I think you learn a lot about how the sausage is made, what decisions are being discussed, and what debates are happening within front offices. So anyway, this has been the latest episode of There Are Giants, not There Are Giants. I'm taking your name. The Bayside as a Giants talk show.
It's my podcast. All right. I don't have to do it this week.
As a Giants talk show, I'm Marc Delucchi. You can follow me on Twitter at Mad Delucchi. That's MADDELUCCHI. Please like and subscribe. Bayside Baseball. If you want to support us a little more in the stuff we're doing, go to patreon.com/Bayside Baseball, and you can do that there. So thanks again. We'll be back next week, and hopefully Carrie and I can see each other. Bye.